Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going back in time, back to the 14th century,
A trip back to the medieval period.
to meet a philosopher you might not be familiar with, Robert Alyngton.
Yeah, not exactly a household name.
But I think you'll find his ideas are pretty fascinating, especially for those who, are into metaphysics and logic.
Oh, absolutely.
Our source material today is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on Alyngton.
It's a great resource.
It is. It's dense, though. So we're going to try to pull out, the key points, the stuff that would make even Plato, sit up and take notice.
We'll give you the cheat sheet for Alyngton.
Exactly. So first things first, who was Robert Alyngton?
Well, picture Oxford in the late 1300s. It's this hub of intellectual activity, and Alyngton is right there in the middle of it. He's connected to some pretty important figures, actually, including John Wycliffe.
Oh, Wycliffe. Yeah, that's a name that people might recognize. The reformer. So Alyngton was kind of swimming in some interesting, maybe even radical waters.
Yeah.
So what was his, main contribution to philosophy?
Well, he was what we call a staunch realist.
Okay. Oh, realist. So, down-to-earth, practical?
No, not quite.
Okay.
When we talk about realism in philosophy, we're talking about this idea of universals.
Oh.
So think about concepts like, justice or humanity.
Right.
Alyngton believed that these concepts, they weren't just mental constructs that we create.
Okay.
He said they actually exist outside of the mind, independent of us.
So he was pushing back against, the nominalists who saw universals as just, names we give to things.
Exactly. He's saying these universals have their own reality.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold claim.
Oh, absolutely. And he takes it even further. He argues that these universals are both identical to and distinct from the individuals that have them.
Now, hold on. How can something be both identical and distinct? That sounds like a paradox.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Let's think about Socrates.
Oh, good old Socrates.
So Socrates is a man, right?
Yes.
Okay, so for Alyngton, the universal man is present in Socrates. It's what makes him man rather than, say, a carrot or something.
Right.
But man also exists apart from Socrates as this universal concept.
So it's kind of like saying man is a blueprint, and Socrates is one specific building built from that blueprint.
I like that. That's a good analogy. The blueprint, that universal, has its own real existence for Alyngton, even though it's also in every building, every individual that conforms to it.
I see. So we're talking about a world where concepts have this real, almost tangible existence.
Exactly. And that leads us to how Alyngton categorized reality. He had a very, very specific way of dividing things up.
Okay, so not your typical, Aristotle 101 categories.
Oh, no, he really went beyond that.
All right, what made his system unique?
Alyngton was very insistent that things in one category were fundamentally different from things in another category.
Okay.
A substance, for example, is just completely different from a quantity or a quality. They're not even on the same playing field.
I see. Okay, can you give me an example? How did he see those categories playing out?
Well, let's stick with substance, quantity, and quality. So substance is the core of something. It's essence, what makes that thing, and not something else.
Right.
Quantity then deals with the measurable aspects of something. It's size, shape, those kinds of things. And quality is more about properties color, texture, those sorts of things.
All right, that seems pretty straightforward. But
Yeah.
how do things actually fit into these categories? Is it a neat and tidy system?
Well, Alyngton actually had 3 ways that things belong to categories: by themselves, by accident, or by reduction.
By themselves, by accident, by reduction. Okay, break those down for us.
Okay, so by itself means that something belongs to that category as part of its essential being.
Right.
So Socrates, for example, he's a substance by itself.
Right, because he is a substance.
Exactly. Now imagine a white dog. The dog is a substance by itself, but the whiteness is an accident. It's not essential to the dog being a dog.
Right, the whiteness is a quality that's accidentally attached to the substance of the dog.
Exactly. And then there's by reduction, which is how Alyngton dealt with things that don't fit neatly into the main categories.
Interesting. What kinds of things?
Well, think of differences between things, or even concepts like God.
Okay.
They don't really belong to one specific category, but we can still understand them in relation to the categories. It's a way of connecting them back to the bigger picture.
So Alyngton was really trying to create a comprehensive system.
Oh, he was a system builder for sure. He wanted to make sure everything had its place, even the outliers.
No loose ends.
Exactly. And he did it all with this incredible rigor and attention to detail.
Impressive. And we haven't even gotten to his theory of substance yet.
Oh, that's where things get really interesting. But maybe we should give our listeners a moment to digest all of this category talk.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is pretty dense stuff.
Yeah.
So, dear listener, while we grab a quick sip of water, think about what's grabbing you so far. What do you think about Alyngton's hyperrealism? Is it convincing?
We'll be back in a flash to tackle substance, so get ready for some serious philosophical heavy lifting.
Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle one of Alyngton's most significant ideas, his theory of substance.
This is where he really diverges from some of his contemporaries.
And what's interesting is he doesn't just, jump into his own view right away.
No, he does.
He actually presents 7 different opinions on substance.
Almost like a little history of substance theory.
Yeah, it's like a buffet of philosophical options.
Yeah.
He really lays out the landscape before dropping his own bombshell.
Precisely. He is engaging with, everyone from Aristotle to Avicenna to Boethius to his contemporary Walter Burley.
Wow, name-dropping all the big names. So which of these 7 opinions did Alyngton ultimately side with?
He ended up embracing John Wycliffe's view.
Wycliffe again. There's that connection. What made Wycliffe's take on substance so compelling to Alyngton?
Well, Wycliffe and Alyngton following him, they believed that what really defines a substance isn't its ability to possess qualities, those absence we talked about,
Right.
but rather its capacity for potency and act.
Potency and act. Now we're getting into some serious Aristotelian terminology.
Can't escape Aristotle.
So can you unpack those terms for us? What exactly did Alyngton mean by potency and act?
Sure. Think of it this way. Potency is the potential for something to change or become something else.
Okay.
Act is the realization of that potential.
I see. So a seed has the potency to become a tree, but it only reaches act when it actually grows into a tree.
That's a perfect example. So for Alyngton, this back and forth between potency and act, this is at the very heart of what it means to be a substance.
So it's not just about a static thing. It's about this constant process of becoming.
Exactly. Substances are dynamic. They're always in this flux between what they are and what they could be. And for Alyngton, this capacity for potency and act, this is what really sets substances apart from everything else in the world.
All right, I think I'm following. Substances are the stars of the show, so to speak. But what about all the other stuff, the non-substance things? Where do quantity and quality fit into all of this?
That's a great question. And remember, Alyngton was a realist through and through.
Right.
So he believed that quantity and quality also have a real existence, but he saw their existence as dependent on substances.
Okay. So are they, less real in Alyngton's view? Sort of second-class citizens in the realm of being?
It's not so much about being less real. It's more about having a different mode of existence. Quantity and quality exist in substances as modes or forms.
Okay.
And for Alyngton, quantity is especially important because it kind of sets the stage for qualities and other accidents. It's like the canvas upon which everything else is painted.
So quantity is foundational.
Interesting.
Did he differ from other thinkers in his view of quantity?
He did. In fact, he directly challenged William of Ockham on this point.
Oh, taking on Occam, that's bold.
Occam believed that quantity was just a mental construct, something we impose on the world. But Alyngton insisted that quantity is a real objective feature of reality.
Back to that realism again.
Exactly. And he even went so far as to try and find a unifying principle behind all the different types of quantity that Aristotle identified.
Wow. Trying to unify Aristotle's categories, that's ambitious.
It was a bold undertaking. He was essentially trying to measure the being of a substance through its quantity.
Okay, so quantity is this active force shaping reality. What about quality? How did Alyngton approach that?
Quality is a bit more straightforward for him. He largely follows Aristotle's lead here, distinguishing between perceptible and non-perceptible qualities.
So perceptible qualities are those we can grasp with our senses, like colors and shapes. What about the non-perceptible ones? Things like, say, courage or wisdom?
Exactly. Those would fall under non-perceptible qualities for Alyngton, along with things like, habits and dispositions, anything that's a quality of a substance but not directly accessible to our senses.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good handle on Alyngton's take on substance, quantity, and quality. But there's still this one big piece of the puzzle we haven't touched on: relations. How did he deal with those? They're always a bit of a philosophical headache.
Yeah, relations. This is where Alyngton really gets unique. He sides with Wycliffe, again, arguing that relations involve this, robust connection between two things. It's not just a conceptual link for him.
He's saying they actually bind things together in the world.
That's right. He sees it almost like a two-way street connecting two locations. He even breaks down relations into 4 parts: the relation itself, the subject, the object, and the foundation.
Okay, I'm a big fan of examples, so break that down for me.
Sure. Let's take the father-son relationship. The
Yep.
relation itself is paternity, the subject is the father, the object is the son, and the foundation is the biological act of fathering.
So it's not just that we label someone as father.
Yeah,
There's a real objective connection grounded in an actual event.
precisely. And then he distinguishes between real relatives and relatives of reason, which is really fascinating.
Relatives of reason are those relationships that only exist in our minds, like imaginary relationships.
He's not quite. Remember, Alyngton wants to avoid anything that smacks of pure mental construction. So for him, relatives of reason are relationships where one of those four parts is missing or not a real thing.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine the relationship between, say, a unicorn and a dragon.
Okay, so a purely hypothetical relationship.
Exactly. It's a relative of reason because neither unicorns nor dragons actually exist, so the foundation is missing.
Clever. He finds a way to talk about those kinds of relationships without having to resort to mental gymnastics.
Yeah.
It all circles back to that hardcore realism of his, doesn't it?
It all comes back to that desire to ground everything in objective reality, even something as abstract as a relationship.
And speaking of abstract concepts, there's one more piece of Alyngton's philosophical system we need to explore. Second intentions. And this is where things get really meta.
Buckle up. This is where Alyngton really pushes the boundaries.
Okay, so second intentions. This is where Alyngton really gets into the weeds of like language and meaning.
Oh, absolutely. This is some high-level philosophical stuff.
He's talking about like the concepts we use to talk about other concepts.
Yeah.
Things like genus, species, even universality itself.
Exactly. And Alyngton was one of the first philosophers to really argue that these second intentions, they're not just tools we use to think. He thought they actually exist in the world.
Wait, so he's saying that something like genus or species, that's not just a mental construct. It actually has an objective reality.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. Pretty radical, right?
Even for Alyngton, that's a pretty bold claim.
Even Burley, who was a staunch realist himself, he wasn't quite willing to go that far. But Alyngton saw it as the logical conclusion of his system.
I mean, if you're already committed to the idea that logic is like a direct reflection of reality, then I guess it makes sense that the tools of logic would also have to be part of reality.
Right. It all fits together.
But I'm curious, how did he deal with the problem of individuality if these second intentions are real?
Okay, yeah, that's a tricky one. Because if second intentions exist, wouldn't that mean there's some kind of like universal individual?
Right, which doesn't really make sense.
Exactly. So what Alyngton does is he basically makes individual, this like atomic term, it can only refer to a single specific thing.
So, kind of like the name Socrates.
Mhm.
It refers to one specific person, not a general category.
Exactly. It can't be generalized or applied more broadly, which, some philosophers might find a little bit problematic, but it does solve the problem of the universal individual within his system.
So it's consistent, even if it's not totally satisfying to everyone.
Exactly. It keeps everything hanging together.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, delved into the intricacies of Alyngton's thought. But I'm wondering, what's the takeaway for our listener? Why should anyone care about this 14th century philosopher and his ideas about second intentions and the reality of universals?
I think Alyngton reminds us that even the most abstract, seemingly obscure philosophical ideas, they actually have implications for how we understand the world around us.
He's not just playing with words.
No. He's trying to get at the very nature of reality. And whether or not you agree with him, I think engaging with these ideas can help us to see the world in a new light, to appreciate the complexity and the depth of even the most everyday things.
So it's not just about memorizing philosophical jargon. It's about using those ideas to open up new ways of seeing and experiencing the world.
Exactly. It's about expanding our horizons.
I like that. And on that note, I think it's time to leave our listener with a final thought, something to ponder as they go about their day.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with your philosophical challenge.
All right, so if Alyngton's right, and these second intentions, these abstract concepts, actually exist out there in the world, not just in our minds, where might we encounter them? What are some real-world examples of these ideas playing out around us?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm not sure I have a ready answer for that, but it's something I'll definitely be thinking about.
And we invite you, dear listener, to join us in that reflection. As you go about your day, keep an eye out for those second intentions, those subtle signs of Alyngton's system at work in the fabric of reality. It's like a philosophical treasure hunt.
Who knows what you might find?
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Robert Alyngton. We hope you've enjoyed exploring his complex and fascinating ideas with us. Until next time, happy philosophizing.